tonight is going to be about when the holidays hurt, naming the heavy and the hidden. And so, as a quick little introduction to me, I am a thanatologist. My name is Dr. Elreacy Dock. I am a thanatologist, which means that I am dedicated to the study of all things pertaining to death, dying, and bereavement. I am a death educator and I am a certified grief educator. I am a doctor of behavioral health, so a lot of times I also lean into providing information about different lifestyle changes and behavioral changes that we can do to sort of support what we're going through during different phases of our life, and some cognitive reframing at times, depending on the circumstances. I am the thanatology department chair at Capstone University, and basically I developed a program there that educates spiritual care practitioners on how to be compassionate servants um, to those who are navigating their end of life journey, whether they're grieving or whether they are actively dying. I am the president of the National Home Funeral Alliance, and more recently, I became a general council member at the Association for the Study of Death in Society. But I think most importantly, I am someone who has been deeply touched by grief and loss throughout my life. And within the past few years in particular, I'm someone who has been touched by not only cumulative loss, but the loss of people due to various types of losses that we stigmatize in our society, such as addiction, suicide, um, wide variety of things. So tonight, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm not going to really teach that much or talk at you. This is really an opportunity for us to explore these emotions. And so we're gathered here this evening to really do something courageous, which is to turn towards our emotions with curiosity and compassion, especially during a season that often tells us to look away. This is your space to honor exactly where you are right now. Now, I have this little QR code here at the bottom, and Susie's going to send out a link. And what this links to is a word cloud. And so I'm going to switch to that screen. Give me one moment. That word cloud is going to show you how we all experience different types of emotions. So let me share this. Okay, so the first question here is, what's one word that describes your relationship with the holiday season this year? Now, I'm going to add in mine. Let's see here. Hmm, I think I would say wavering. And so what you're going to notice is that as we add in different words, this is going to continue to develop on the screen. And if someone were to add multiple words that were all the same, certain words would enlarge. So if everyone was feeling sad, for example, you would see that more prominently. Or if everyone was feeling calm, that would pop up. Um, but it's showing you that there's a wide variety of emotions here. Numbness, dreading it, yes. Tentative, apprehensive, chaotic. I definitely relate to these. And I think that you'll find that there are many people in this gathering this evening or morning, depending on where you're at, um, that feel similarly dysregulated. That's a very, very prominent one. Yes. So we'll give it around another minute or two for everyone to add in their emotions, how they're feeling. Disengaged. Yes. And so, what I want you to notice here is that a lot of us are feeling uncomfortable. We're really struggling with this season, and that's okay. You know, I think there's usually a social narrative somewhat about the holiday season where this is supposed to be the happiest time of the year and we're supposed to just kind of put everything aside and get together and all feel these warm, glowing, supportive emotions. But it's not that simple and it's never that easy. And when it comes to sharing our feelings with others, these are often the feelings that we tend to hide away, not only because we've been told by the norms of society that these emotions are not meant to be expressed, but also because a lot of times we're holding shame about it or we're feeling guilty because we look at other people and we think, well, they look so happy and they're able to do all of these things during the holidays. What's wrong with me? Why don't I feel joyous? Absolutely. So Susie mentioned that if you're not able to add the words for you, she can add them in there. Thank you, Susie. So feel free to continue adding those in. I'm going to shift back to the slides here because this is going to continue to develop as we go through this presentation. Now, before we begin the larger part of the workshop, I want to put up some agreements here. So these are the agreements that I think are necessary for a supportive space at a minimum. There's no pressure to share. Listening and allowing yourself to be present is a form of participation, and there's no fixing in these moments that we're sharing together. So if you just want to observe and maybe you're not comfortable with putting something on the screen or in the word cloud, that's entirely fine, as long as you are open to just navigating those emotions in your heart and in your mind. Because a lot of times we're facing different feelings that we might not have normally encountered otherwise. Now, we've gone over your relationship with the holidays, and that word cloud is actively developing, right? So the next thing we're going to talk about is grieving styles and the importance of witnessing grief. Then we're going to move into myths and truths and grief during the holidays. We're going to look at collective witnessing using the feelings wheel. And then we're going to do a small exercise on giving yourself permission. So let's talk about grieving styles. Intuitive grieving and instrumental grieving are terms that were coined by grief experts Kenneth Doka and Terry Martin, and what they refer to are styles of grief that emerge um, not only based on how you navigate your own grief experience, but what helps you when you're coping. So intuitive grieving is more process oriented. It tends to be more focused on an emotional experience, which is what we're focusing on here. It's addressing that sadness, that longing, that pain. And even if you're not feeling particularly still sore about your loss, it pertains to talking about your feelings and sharing them with other people. Whereas instrumental grief is more action oriented and it's focused on doing. So this can look like fixing things, achieving mastery in a new skill. If you've lost someone and you were responsible for taking on managing the estate or planning a funeral or doing something that was very action oriented because you felt like that was your duty or someone gave you that responsibility, that would be instrumental grieving. But ultimately, most people do not do one or the other. They blend these styles of grieving. And so sometimes we tend to be a little bit more into the intuitive grieving side where we're expressing ourselves and how we feel. And other times we're like, no, I need to lean into doing something like an activity or, somatic exercise or you name it. And that's fine. You can have a balance either way. But this is really here to show you that if you look at grief frameworks, such as the dual process model, feeling and expressing your emotions are kind of central to this, even if society tells you that you need to keep these uncomfortable emotions to yourself. So the dual process model of grief describes two oscillating types of coping. And this is known as loss-oriented coping and restoration-oriented coping. And so it's considered healthy, quote unquote, if you are able to move back and forth between these two states. Now, the reason why I said healthy with quotation marks there is that if your grief doesn't look like this, if you don't feel that it really aligns or matches with it, that's okay. That doesn't mean that you're experiencing unhealthy grieving. It just means that we all grieve differently. And so there's so many different grief frameworks. You could apply any of them. You could look at a number of them, there's dozens, and find that it just doesn't fit. And that's okay. Everyone is unique. But the point of this is that when we have loss-oriented coping, we are more focused on confronting the pain of our loss. So this might be, remembering what once was, or having a yearning for who or what we've lost, or talking about the past, thinking about old memories, old experiences. That's fine. Some people who are leaning into this tend to look more at attending support groups, meeting like-minded people, sort of like what we're doing this evening. We are a group of like-minded people who are experiencing loss, and this is a form of loss-oriented coping, and that's okay. There's also restoration-oriented coping, and this really pertains to finding a way to move forward without who or what you've lost. Um, and I wouldn't really say moving on, because moving on sort of implies in our society that, like, you've gotten over it, everything's good now. And it's never really that simple. I like to think of it as moving forward, because you're carrying that grief and that loss with you, but you're finding new ways to integrate it um, into your lifestyle and to have it enrich your life rather than having it sort of pull you down. And so this can look like taking on a responsibility, focusing on work again, daily routines, but really you're just getting back into the swing of things. Now, being mindful of that, let's kind of look at a few myths and truths about grief. So, like I said, there's a common narrative that you should be over it by now. And, I would argue that grief doesn't really follow a timeline. You can experience grief and carry it with you throughout your life and feel like you're having good days and feel like you're having bad days, and that's normal. It could be 10 years later, and you could still feel incredibly strained when you think of certain types of relationships or certain experiences that have contributed to loss in your life. Another one that comes up a lot during the holidays is it's disrespectful to feel joy or laugh while you're grieving. I think this kind of circles back to what Amanda was sharing earlier about those both and statements, where you can be grieving, but you can also find joy in life. It's okay if you laugh sometimes. It's okay if you had a moment that made you smile. It's not a betrayal of your love or your loss, and it doesn't mean that you're grieving less. It means that you can appreciate the other things that are happening in the world around you, and that you are able to find a balance between both. It can be difficult, but that balance is there. Another prominent one is the best way to handle the holidays is to keep busy and avoid thinking about your grief. This this really tends to be, I would say it's both an emotional element and a psychological element, because our brains are designed to protect us from pain. And whenever we are faced with pain or things that we know are going to be painful for us, we avoid it. And so the natural thought is, well, this is going to make me uncomfortable. I should avoid it always. Um, Avoiding your emotions isn't really that good overall, because what happens is either A, you will interrupt your grief process and you will experience delayed grief, and then one day it's going to hit you months or years later down in the road, and you're going to be faced with all these intense emotions that you didn't initially encounter. Or B, you're going to find that something that was initially, it would have been a little bit easier to go through day by day by day, is now something that feels like it's suffocating you. And that can be really difficult to process all at once versus if you're taking it a moment at a time, an hour at a time, however much time you need is fine, but just allowing yourself to feel it and having it flow through you. Sometimes you're told that you need to maintain all of the same traditions to honor your loved ones. I don't really think that that's necessary. I think that what's comforting for some people is absolutely painful for others. It can be excruciating depending on the circumstances. And so it's okay if you need to change a tradition, adapt it, pause, whatever feels right to you. You don't have to be strong for everyone else. You can show your true emotions to give others the space to show theirs. And with that, I want to say that, grief is a universal experience, but the space to process it and the emotions and to have the resources that support that experience is not universal. It is unfortunately often a luxury in our day and age. And so when you're able to give space for others to show their emotions and to express their grief, that's a wonderful thing. And then finally, grieving alone is stronger or easier on others. Well, the reality is that grief thrives in isolation. And when we share our grief with other people, it makes it more tolerable to carry, which is why it's so important to have a community. So, why witness grief? Well, it validates our reality. It externalizes our emotions. So, that goes back to that concept of having it flow through you. It integrates our story and it reminds us that we are not alone. And I think a lot of times when we consider witnessing grief, we think about it when grief is acute, when it has just happened. Maybe, during the first week, the first few months, the first year, maybe even the first 2 years. But what I've found is that witnessing grief is a very powerful experience regardless of where you are in your journey. So, as an example, I had a loss that had occurred maybe 3 or 4 years ago at this point, and I was recently working with a end-of-life doula on a webinar. And during that webinar, he mentioned something about anticipatory abandonment. And so, anticipatory abandonment really speaks to this experience of you are losing someone or something, and it causes you to sort of pull back into your abandonment wound where you're asking, why are you going? What did I do? Why are you leaving me so soon? Is there anything I can do to prevent you from leaving me? And you know that that loss is inevitable, but there's nothing you can really do to address it because you've been taught that it's only one thing, it's just grief. Whereas it's abandonment. So if you think about this in the context of like abandonment, betrayal, sadness, guilt, shame, there's so many emotions that are so prominent within our grief, but we've boxed them up into one term. And to have those emotions witnessed can be powerful because sometimes it's something that you didn't even realize was there. It was lying under the surface. It was hard to actually verbalize, right? And so we can't always change the world's narrative about our loss, but what we can do is create a counter narrative of love and support within a community. So this is the feeling wheel, and I find this to be really helpful for those who are struggling with naming certain emotions, because I think at the core, we always think about things like sadness, anger, being scared, feeling happy, powerful, peaceful, etc. But there are many, many emotions that are tied to that that emerge from those core emotions. And so, what the feeling wheel is, if you look at it here, is in the center of the wheel, you have those core emotions. And then in the second wheel that's inside of it, or the second circle, you have these other emotions that can be associated with that. So, for example, if someone is feeling sad, they might also be feeling depressed. They might be lonely. They might feel guilty or ashamed over something. If you were feeling scared, you might feel actually helpless or rejected or confused, insecure. So this can kind of help you to think about what is at the core of this. And really you can do it in two separate ways. You can either start from your core emotion and work your way outward to figure out which one of these matches you, or you can start on the outside and work in and realize that, that sarcasm, that you made a statement that might have hurt somebody's feelings, or that skepticism that you had might actually be a core feeling of anger or feeling mad. So I want to ask you, is there a should that you're carrying about how you're supposed to feel based off of the narrative that's been given to you all of these years? And mind you, these narratives are not only shaped by our society, they're shaped by our culture, they're shaped by our socioeconomic status, our identity, our gender, many different things influence what our shoulds are when it comes to grief. So, what do you think your should is? You can drop it in the chat. You can call it out if you want to. And what would life look like, or what would happen right now if you were to put that should down? So if you feel that you should always be joyful and with that joy during the holidays, it provides this implication that you need to be going to all of the parties, you need to cook a full course meal, you need to be social, you need to laugh at jokes when you don't even think they're funny, you need to drag yourself out of the bed when you don't feel like moving at all. If you were to just remove that, I should be joyful, and all of those implications that come with that, how would you actually feel? Or maybe it's the reverse. Maybe you feel that you should feel sad because you've experienced such a profound loss and you wonder, what's wrong with me? Why am I not feeling sad? Why do I feel numb? Um, why does my sadness not look like someone else's sadness? This is something to really sort of explore with curiosity and ask yourself why you are judging yourself under these other contexts that have been imposed upon you. Another one I would pose is, if your grief could speak about this holiday season, what is one word that it would whisper, and what word would it shout? So I think it can be really easy to say, um, well, easy is subjective, but I think it can be easy to say, I'm feeling really sad right now. And I don't want to do any of this. I don't want to go through the holidays. I just feel sad. But what it might actually whisper behind that, that you're uncomfortable to express, is, I'm feeling really lonely. And I know that I want to have some sort of interaction with someone, but I don't want to do it in this context. Or maybe I'm lonely, but I only want to be with the person I lost. And so I don't feel like celebrating. Um, it looks different for everybody. For some people, what tend to encounter is that they feel angry, but what's being whispered in the back is that they feel ashamed. They're blaming themselves for something. The amount of people that tend to blame themselves due to certain types of losses, like um, miscarriages or suicide or even addictions. A lot of times you feel angry that the person is gone or that you don't have this future with them, but somewhere in there you might be feeling guilty. Maybe you had like an argument prior to the loss occurring and you blame yourself for that. And you feel angry at yourself for even having that interaction before everything happened. So this really shows that there's layers to our emotions when we're grieving. Now, this one is a little bit challenging. So this one really kind of pushes on the idea of not even the emotions that are whispered in the back that we don't speak of, but the emotions that we are afraid of feeling. And this can really pertain to, let me see what would be a good one. The feeling of rejection. Um, I can think of an example where there was a lady I was working with who had lost her spouse. And when she lost her spouse, what she discovered is that the relationship dynamics completely changed after his death. Basically, everyone who was on his side of the family just kind of stopped interacting with her because he was her connection to them and vice versa. And so, since they didn't have a really strong relationship prior to her spouse dying, they just all sort of backed away after he died. And so she felt this deep, immense sense of rejection because now the person who she had intended to spend her life with was gone, but also so was, her mother-in-law, her sister-in-law, this family that was really supposed to embrace her had disappeared. For other people, it's loneliness. A lot of times, unfortunately, when you lose your person, sometimes you only have that one person. I used to work on a crisis line during COVID. And so I took crisis calls for 3 years. And let me tell you, the amount of emotions that you are confronted with on a crisis call and how much you realize people are seeking not only compassion, but just someone to listen and to understand them, it's very intense. But a lot of that was individuals who would call in and they were just absolutely crushed because they had lost their one and only person to the pandemic. And now they were at home alone. They couldn't go out anywhere because we were in lockdown. And that loneliness was just eating away at them. And so that's really difficult to confront. And that's why we also have a loneliness epidemic globally, is because people are seeking compassion, they're seeking connection. You see so many opportunities for bids for connection that just go unnoticed or unmet because that's not what we've cultivated our society to be. So, thinking along those lines, the next question becomes, what's something you're carrying with you this season that others might not see? I put this question here because this is really kind of, it can pertain to anyone, but it's really kind of directed at people who have been either told that they need to be strong for everyone, or they've been placed in circumstances that have forced them to be the strong one. This is not only, it's not a gendered experience because anyone can experience this. I do see it occur a bit more among men because men are viewed as needing to be stoic and providers and to sort of not show emotions and not be sensitive. So I tend to see it a bit more with them, but really this is something that can impact anyone. And so I would question, what is something that you are carrying with you that people would never guess you're carrying? Is it disenfranchisement? Is it feeling overwhelmed? Is it feeling inadequate? Is it feeling as if you might never have that sense of security and safety again after whom or what you've lost? Um, Is it feeling numb when you're the person that always needs to hold space for others? Perhaps you're dealing with compassion fatigue, but you are in a helping profession, and so that's just not something you're allowed to really express that openly due to our social norms. That one I would consider, sitting with it and kind of just allowing your mind to deconstruct it. What is it that you don't want everyone to see or you don't want everyone to know about you? And then the next one is what's the kindest thing that you could do for your grieving self today? And so this one really is kind of shifting towards now that you have all of these heavy emotions, now that you are confronting these emotions that no one else is supposed to see, and you don't necessarily want to encounter them either, um, day to day, how could you show yourself compassion? It sounds so simple and so logical, right? But the reality is that a lot of times we are so focused on showing compassion to other people, and we can give so many other people grace, but we can't give ourselves that same compassion and grace. We can't give ourselves that same patience. Um, we see other people that are experiencing loss, and we remember that, oh, she lost her brother, or hey, he lost his wife, or oh, my best friend just lost their dog. I need to, be mindful of this and be supportive and kind of like carry them through this experience, right? But when we have those same experiences, we don't offer ourselves that same gentleness, that same goodness, that same kindness. And sometimes during the holidays, what is the kindest thing for us seems selfish because we are focused on pleasing everyone else. So this can look like, perhaps you are the person who always does the big, extravagant holiday dinners and events, and you do all of the cooking, and you make everyone laugh, you wrap all of the gifts, you go out to, pay homage to your faith, whatever it is. Um, and now you've experienced loss and you just don't feel up to it right now. And for you to pull back and to say, I can't do this, makes you feel as if you are being selfish because you're thinking that your decision is going to ruin the holiday for everyone else. But on the flip side of that, if let's say that the situation were reversed, would other people give you that same kindness and compassion? So I just want you to sort of think about that, and think about what that leads you to. So we've talked a lot about permission and boundaries today. And a boundary that I always like to think about is what is one thing that you could give yourself permission to not do this year and not feel as if you have to apologize for it? I think a lot of times we tend to conceptualize this as like, I give myself the permission to, you know, do X, Y, and Z. Like some people will create a whole new routine. They'll give themselves permission for self-care, which is great. But sometimes self-care is actually doing absolutely nothing when you're the person that does something all of the time. Um, what is something that you could give yourself the permission to simply not do and sit with comfortably? This means not doing it and not overanalyzing yourself, not critiquing yourself, not holding yourself to a level of perfection that is often unattainable, and not comparing yourself to others. Just simply not doing it and sitting with that decision to not do it and feeling okay about it. So, what I'm asking you to really do beneath all of this is to give yourself the permission to feel the emotions that others have asked you to keep hidden away during the holiday season. You need to listen to your needs and let them be your guide. Instead of thinking of everyone else's needs during this season, just take a moment to focus on your own. Now, we have the QR code here again, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to the other side of our little word cloud. Okay, here we go. So that link is going to go back out, or you can access it again if you want to scroll up, either way. But this one is going to pertain to what might you give yourself permission for this year? And I'm going to share my screen and we're going to present this. Okay. There you go. Do nothing. Yes, that's a great one. Rest. Skip the family drama. I think that's a huge one for many people, especially this year. Let's see what else pops up here. Take time out as needed. Yes. Get creative. That's a great one. I think getting creative is a beautiful one, and Susie certainly showed us how to do that earlier and how it can be pivotal to expressing our grief and the emotions that are contained so deep within it. Moving slower. I really love the concept of moving slower. I think that unfortunately, our society and our circumstances have sort of pushed us into this toxic hustle productivity sort of lifestyle. And we think that if we are not doing things constantly, that we lack value or that we are lazy or that we don't have the drive and the ambition that other people do. But what really matters is moving slower, taking that moment to breathe, to process, to simply be present. Taking that extra 10 minutes to look at the sunrise or the sunset and reflect. Taking that time to do a grounding exercise, taking that time to paint and express yourself and find ways to contribute to the world around you, but also to accept what the world around you is contributing to your life. Taking walks in nature, yes. Be. I love that one. Giving yourself permission to simply be. And to do that is enough. You don't have to do a bunch of strenuous, overwhelming, demanding work. You can just be, just exist. Gift giving grandmother, yes. Reaching out to friends. Saying no. Sometimes the most difficult thing is to say no, but saying no can also be the healthiest thing that we do. Gentle and kindness to self, yes. You know, an interesting concept that someone suggested to me once is sometimes you have to be your own best friend. And what that means is if you wouldn't treat your best friend a certain way, if you wouldn't be cruel to them, if they were going through a circumstance, you would be right there with them. Um, Sometimes you have to be your own best friend and treat yourself with that same kindness and gentleness. Releasing perfection. Yes, that's a huge one. And the reality is that, especially in our society, perfection is an illusion. We see so much of what we think is perfection when we're looking at mass media and we're looking at social media, we're looking at Instagram, we're looking at YouTube and all of these different things. We're looking at people driving past us and they look happy, or we see our coworker and they just went on this amazing vacation and they're doing all of these amazing things. Why aren't we doing it? But it's an illusion. It's subjective. Those same people that are going through those experiences don't think that they've reached perfection. And if they do think they've reached perfection, it's perhaps something else deeper that needs to be considered there. Um, mm, don't should on myself. Yes. Let go of the weight of the should. Let your mind wander. Accepting limitations. Hmm. Being able to say, I can't. Yes. Mm. Opting out. That's a great one. I love how at the center of this, as this is developing, rest is central. We're starting to realize that we should not let ourselves burn out anymore. We need to rest. And another big one is saying no. Um, Doing nothing is another one. Having boundaries, yes. Now, do you see that from looking at this, there are now so many of you that are beginning to just say you're going to do nothing. You're going to say no, you're going to opt out. You're not going to, get in the hustle and bustle. You're going just take the time out. And I think that it's important to acknowledge this because a lot of times when we are saying no, or even when we're considering no, we haven't even said it because we're kind of tied up and feeling guilty about it. We think, well, no one else is going to say no. I'm going to feel absolutely, horrible if I say no and then this doesn't get done, or this experience doesn't happen, or we don't go here, or we don't do this tradition. But now you see that you are not the exception to the rule here. If you say no, there's other people that are going to say no too, and that's okay. And even if you were the only person who said no and chose not to do a tradition or not to, buy into the usual hype of the holiday, that would be okay because it's what's right for you. Let's see here. Yes, Sundari. We are all choosing rest for ourselves in one way or another. And that's crucial. The amount of people that I think are operating on absolute fumes, they're already burnt out, both emotionally, psychologically, and otherwise, and from a behavioral health viewpoint, one of the things that we do in behavioral health, and one of the things I look at as a doctor of behavioral health, is how um, overworking yourself, being exposed to so many different stressors, having so many unhealthy lifestyle behaviors in our lives, how that not only contributes to chronic disease, but exacerbates it and makes it worse. And a lot of times, what you will see is that people who have chronic disease or people who have autoimmune diseases, those symptoms will flare when they are stressed out, when they're pushing themselves beyond their limits. And eventually, you reach a point that you can't push anymore and you just collapse. And when I say you just collapse, either that could turn into a mental status change where you are struggling with your mental health. Perhaps you become depressed or anxious, or perhaps you have some trauma that begins to worsen over time. Or it can be literally a collapse of your overall health. There's a lot of people that have either ended up in the hospital for various reasons or their immune system has dropped. I had a friend who died around a month or so ago, and he was a very talented friend. He was an impeccable designer, but he was so dedicated to constantly working and constantly putting himself into everything he did. He overworked, and he actually ended up having a stroke at one point. He was a very young man when he had a stroke, and he recovered from that stroke. But that's just to show you that when you are putting too much stress and too much strain on your body and on yourself as um, I would say overall as a being in this world, it can have very, very detrimental implications on your health. So you have to be gentle with yourself and be careful with yourself. All right, so we are going to hold on, give me one moment. So if you want, you can take a screenshot of this because we created this together. This is all of our own feelings and emotions and permissions that we've input into this particular word cloud. And I'll give you a few minutes to look at this one, and then I'm going to switch back to our old one just in case you want to take a screenshot of that. And when you look at it, if you look at it in the future, I want you to remember that your emotions and that your permissions and how you felt in this moment are in this cloud, and that there were other people who felt the same way. And we all made space for each other by simply expressing it and sitting with it. Okay, now I'm going to go to the other one. Here's our original one from the beginning. Hmm, lots of powerful emotions on this one. Estranged, tired, apprehensive, abandonment, conflicted, grateful. I think it's beautiful that despite the fact that we have a lot of uncomfortable emotions here, we also have beautiful and happy emotions on here, such as gratitude and hope. Um, and I hope that it's a reminder to you that even if you are going through these difficult emotions, there's always the opportunity for that hope to emerge or for that gratefulness to emerge. Can you?
Elreacy, can you put up the other word cloud? Someone
Yes.
asked for that. Karen asked for that.
There you go.
Thanks.
You're welcome. I apologize if you hear my dog barking in the background. You're welcome, Karen.
I don't think we can hear your dog.
Okay, good. He's a bit of a yapper. Um, all right, so I'm going to stop sharing this. And I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you because you were willing to sit here and to approach these emotions with curiosity. Um, it can be very difficult, especially when you are used to wearing your mask on a day-to-day basis of always being happy or always being the supportive one. It can be difficult to actually face those emotions that you don't want to talk about. And it can be equally challenging to confront those emotions from a curious perspective without allowing yourself to be engrossed in them. So what we did in this experience was we observed it. We thought about different scenarios and we thought about the implications it has and what that looks like for each of us in our day-to-day experience. And we observed it, but we didn't allow it to overtake ourselves. So, now I always like to end on sort of an actionable note. So, the freebie that I provided to you is called Naming the Nuances of Grief. It is a workbook. Um, I designed this workbook with similar prompts for you to explore your grief on a day-to-day basis. And a lot of them involve just observing how you feel about things and finding different ways to um, kind of figure out what those emotions are. You know, sometimes it can be really difficult to discuss emotions or to verbalize them. So, for example, I have a prompt in there that sort of asks you, you know, if your grief was we'll say like a type of weather, what would it look like? It can be easier to envision something rather than express it. And so that workbook is going to provide you with prompts for the rest of the month. I hope that it will help you on your journey, even if you don't answer one every day. You don't necessarily have to write it out if you're uncomfortable, but just let it be something that you reflect on and maybe come back to at a later point. Or maybe you know someone else who might benefit from it and you can send it to them as well. So, thank you for being willing to be present with us tonight.